The transport ship landed on Nexus Prime with a soft thud. Through the thick windows, Lee Tae-ho could see the massive meeting hall where representatives from dozens of alien species would gather. This was the most important diplomatic meeting in 100 years. The Treaty of Stellar Boundaries would decide which species controlled which parts of space. Tae-ho straightened his simple black suit and checked his reflection. No weapons hung from his belt. No energy shields covered his body. He looked exactly like what he was, a regular human diplomat with nothing but words to protect him. "Ambassador, are you sure about this?" Park So-min asked from the seat beside him. She held a data pad with information about all the alien species they would meet. Her voice carried worry. "Every other delegation brings weapons. Even their diplomats carry ceremonial swords or energy blasters." Kim Do-won, their security chief, frowned at the window. Outside, he could see other delegations walking toward the meeting hall. The Vorthak warriors wore full battle armor. The insectoid hive speakers carried bioweapons that looked like living metal. Even the peaceful-looking resonants had crystal formations that could shoot deadly light beams. "The humans look weak," Do-won said quietly. "Without weapons, the other species might not respect us." Tae-ho smiled and stood up. "That's exactly what we want them to think." The three humans left their ship and walked across the landing field. Nexus Prime was a neutral world, built specifically for meetings like this. The air smelled strange, like metal and flowers mixed together. 3 suns hung in the purple sky, casting weird shadows everywhere. Other delegations stared as the humans passed. Tae-ho heard whispers in various alien languages. He understood some of them. The words were not kind. "Look at the soft ones," a Vorthak warrior growled. "They bring no weapons to a meeting of powers." "Prey species," another alien said. "How did they even survive long enough to reach space?" So-min's face turned red with anger, but Tae-ho touched her arm gently. "Let them talk," he said softly. "Words are just sounds until they carry truth." The meeting hall was enormous. The ceiling stretched up so high that clouds formed near the top. Representatives from 47 different species filled the space. Each delegation had its own section with seats designed for their body types. The human section was small, just 3 chairs in a space meant for a much larger group. Tae-ho, So-min, and Do-won sat down and waited. A massive creature that looked like a walking mountain called the meeting to order. This was the speaker for the council, elected to keep peace during discussions. His voice boomed across the hall like thunder. "We gathered to divide the galaxy fairly," the speaker announced. "Each species will present their claims. Each will defend their right to rule certain worlds and systems." The first presentation came from the Torgan Imperium. General Crag Bloodclaw stood 8 feet tall, covered in red armor that looked like it was made from the bones of his enemies. When he spoke, every word sounded like a threat. "The Torgan Imperium claims the Outer Rim territories," he declared. "We have conquered these worlds with blood and steel. They belong to us by right of war." Several species nodded in agreement. In this galaxy, strength meant everything. The ability to take and hold territory was respected above all else. Next came the Shadowkin delegate, a creature that seemed to be made of living darkness. Umbral Whisper's voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The Shadow Realms extend into dimensions your species cannot even see," the creature said. "We claim all worlds that touch the void between stars." More presentations followed. Each species tried to sound stronger and more dangerous than the last. The insectoid hive speakers claimed worlds based on their ability to breed armies faster than any other species. The crystalline resonance wanted systems rich in rare minerals that they could absorb. Finally, it was humanity's turn. Tejo stood up slowly. He looked very small compared to the aliens around him. His voice was quiet, forcing everyone to listen carefully. "Humanity claims no new worlds," he said. "We ask only to keep the systems we already call home. We seek trade agreements and peaceful relationships with all species." Silence filled the hall. Then War Chieftain Grixtal of the Vorthak delegation began to laugh. It was a harsh, cruel sound. "This is what happens when prey species reach for power," Grixtal said. "They beg instead of demand. They offer friendship to those who should be their masters." Other Vorthak warriors joined his laughter. Soon, representatives from several species were making jokes about human weakness. Tejo stood calmly and let them laugh. But not everyone found it funny. Ancient One, who remembers, the oldest being in the council, watched the humans with strange interest. His species had lived for thousands of years, and his eyes held knowledge that others had forgotten. The real problems started during the break between sessions. Representatives from different species gathered in small groups, arguing about territory and resources. Old hatreds that had been buried for decades began to surface. Near the refreshment area, Hive Speaker Zakth faced off against Crystal Singer 3. Their species had fought wars in the past over mining rights in the Spiral Arm. "Your kind steals what rightfully belongs to the Hive," Zakth clicked, his mandibles spreading wide in threat display. "Crystal Songs were here first," Crystal Singer 3 replied, his body beginning to glow with dangerous energy. "Insect spawn have no claim to our ancestral harmonies." The argument grew louder. Other aliens stopped their conversations to watch. Tensions that had been building for years were about to explode. Zakth's bioweapon began to extend from his arm, a living blade that dripped with poison. Crystal Singer 3's body blazed brighter, preparing to release a beam of pure light that could cut through metal. That was when Tejo stepped between them. He moved without fear, placing himself directly in the path of both weapons. His hands were empty. His face was calm. He looked at each alien in turn. "Friends," he said quietly, "is this really how we want to begin our new era of cooperation?" The two aliens hesitated. Something in the human's voice made them pause. Zakth's weapon stopped extending. Crystal Singer 3's glow began to fade. "This human seeks to interfere," Grixtal called out from across the room. "Remove him so that real warriors can settle their dispute properly." But Tejo didn't move. He kept looking at Zakth and Crystal Singer 3 with genuine concern in his eyes. "I know your species have history," he said, "pain that goes back generations. But look around this room. How many species are here? How many different ways of life? If we can't find peace here, in this place built for peace, where can we find it?" Something changed in the room. The angry murmurs died down. Even Grixtal stopped shouting. Zakth slowly retracted his bioweapon. "The human speaks strangely," he clicked. "His words carry weight that should not be possible." Crystal Singer 3's glow faded completely. "There is truth in what he says. Perhaps. Perhaps this is not the time for old disputes." The two aliens stepped back from each other. The immediate danger was over. Ancient One who remembers watched all of this with growing interest. When the Yahtzee session resumed, he made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I request a private audience with the human delegation," he said. "There are things they must know before these negotiations continue." Tae-ho bowed respectfully. "We would be honored, Ancient One." As the day's meetings ended, So-min and Do-wan followed their ambassador toward an uncertain future. Neither of them understood what had just happened. How had Tae-ho stopped a fight just by standing there? Why did his words seem to carry more power than weapons? Ancient One who remembers had answers. But those answers would change everything. They thought they knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. Ancient One who remembers led the three humans through corridors that seemed older than the rest of Nexus Prime. The walls were covered with symbols from languages that no one spoke anymore. The air felt heavy with the weight of forgotten history. Tae-ho, So-min, and Do-wan followed in silence. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the corridors were much larger than they appeared. Ancient One moved slowly but steadily, his form shifting between solid and transparent like a living ghost. "How old is he?" So-min whispered to Tae-ho. "Old enough to remember when the galaxy was very different," Tae-ho replied quietly. They entered, a circular room filled with devices that hummed with strange energy. The walls were covered with screens that showed star maps, but not current ones. These maps showed systems that no longer existed, worlds that had been destroyed long ago. Ancient One who remembers turned to face them. His form became more solid, revealing features that belonged to no species the humans had ever seen. His eyes held the depth of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. "Sit," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "What I am about to show you will change how you see your place in this galaxy." The humans sat on chairs that formed themselves from the floor. Ancient One touched a control panel, and the room around them disappeared. They found themselves floating in space, surrounded by stars and planets that looked real enough to touch. 2,000 years ago, Ancient One began. The galaxy burned. The peaceful star field around them suddenly exploded into chaos. Ships appeared everywhere. Massive vessels locked in desperate battle. Planets cracked and died. Entire star systems went dark as their suns were snuffed out like candles. So-min gasped. Do-wan reached for weapons that weren't there. Even Tae-ho felt his heart race as he watched the destruction unfold around them. 7 species fought the War of 1,000 Suns, Ancient One explained. Each believed they deserved to rule the galaxy. Each was willing to destroy everything rather than share power. The hologram showed fleets of millions of ships. Weapons that could destroy planets fired constantly. The space between stars filled with debris and the bodies of the dead. "I was young then," Ancient One said sadly. "A commander in the 3rd Fleet of my people. We were so sure we were fighting for justice. Every species felt the same way." Tae-ho watched a beautiful blue planet crack in half as weapons tore it apart. "How did it end?" "It almost didn't," Ancient One replied. "We fought until there was almost nothing left to fight for. Billions were dead. Hundreds of worlds were gone. The survivors barely had enough ships to protect what remained." The hologram shifted to show the final battle. 7 massive fleets faced each other in empty space, preparing for one last fight that would decide who ruled the ashes of the galaxy. "That's when they appeared," Ancient One said softly. 3 small ships materialized in the middle of the war. Fleets. They were simple vessels, clearly built for exploration rather than war. Compared to the massive battleships around them, they looked like insects. The ships were human, Ancient One continued. But humanity was not part of our galaxy then. These three had come from far away, drawn by the destruction we were causing. The hologram zoomed in on the human ships. Airlocks opened, and three figures stepped out into the vacuum of space. They wore no spacesuits, no armor, no protection of any kind. They simply walked through space as if it were air. So Min leaned forward. That's impossible. How could they survive in space without suits? Watch, Ancient One said. The three humans, Han Ji-woo, Yoon Nari, and Choi Min-ho, moved toward the nearest war fleet. They showed no fear as massive weapons turned toward them. They simply began to speak, but their words didn't come through radio or communication systems. Their voices somehow reached every ship in every fleet at the same time. The words were in a language that no one had heard before, yet every being understood them perfectly. "Brothers and sisters of the void," Ji-woo said, his voice carrying impossible distances. "Why do you choose to end the Song of the Stars?" The humans' words seemed to hit the warring fleets like a physical force. Weapons that had been charging suddenly powered down. Ships that had been moving into attack positions stopped dead in space. "We have traveled far to see the beauty of your galaxy," Nari said, "but we find only pain and anger. We feel the fear that drives you to destroy each other." Tae-ho felt something strange as he watched the hologram. The words of the ancient humans seemed to reach him too. Even though this was just a recording from thousands of years ago, he felt a deep sadness for all the lives lost in the war. "Look around you," Min-ho said, his voice somehow gentle despite the chaos surrounding him. "See what your anger has created. Is this the galaxy you wanted to leave for your children?" In the hologram, something impossible began to happen. The crews of the warships, beings trained for nothing but violence, began to cry. Hardened warriors who had fought for decades put down their weapons and wept for the destruction they had caused. "I remember that moment," Ancient One said quietly. "I was on the command deck of the dreadnought Eternal Victory. We had just armed, our planet-killing weapon, ready to destroy the enemy homeworld. Then those three humans spoke, and suddenly I could feel the terror of every being on that planet. I felt their children's fear. I felt their elders' grief. I couldn't fire the weapon. None of us could." The hologram showed the aftermath. One by one, the great war fleets powered down their weapons. Representatives from each species met in neutral space to discuss peace terms. The War of 1,000 Suns ended not with a final battle, but with tears and forgiveness. "What happened to the three humans?" Tae-ho asked. Ancient One's expression grew sad. "They stayed long enough to help us write the first peace treaties. Then they said their work was done and returned to wherever they had come from. We never saw them again." "But why are you telling us this?" So Min asked. "What does this have to do with our diplomatic mission?" Ancient One looked at her with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "Because those three humans did something that should have been impossible. They ended a galactic war with nothing but words. No weapons, no threats, no force of any kind. They simply made us feel what others were feeling." Duwon frowned. "You mean they used some kind of mind control?" "No," Ancient One said. "Mind control forces thoughts that aren't yours. What they did was the opposite. They helped us understand thoughts and feelings that we had been ignoring. They made us see the pain we were causing, the fear we were creating." The hologram faded, and they were back in the circular room. Ancient One moved to another control panel and activated a different display. This one showed brain scans and biological readings. After the war, we studied everything we could about those three humans, he explained. What we found was disturbing. Their brain patterns were unlike anything we had ever seen. They seemed to naturally connect with the emotions of other beings, even across species barriers. So Min studied the brain scans with growing alarm. These readings show massive activity in areas related to empathy and emotional processing, but the levels are far beyond what should be possible. Exactly, Ancient One said. Those three humans felt emotions more deeply than any being we had ever encountered. When they spoke about pain and fear, they weren't guessing or imagining. They were actually experiencing what others felt. Taeho thought about what had happened in the meeting hall earlier. When he had stepped between Zaxth and Crystal Singer 3, he had felt something strange. For a moment, he had experienced their anger and fear as if it were his own. He had thought it was just his imagination. "Why are you showing us this?" he asked. Ancient One turned to look directly at him. "Because what happened today in the meeting hall was not the first time I've seen a human do the impossible. When you stepped between those two warriors, you didn't just speak words of peace. You made them feel the cost of violence." The old being moved closer to Taeho. "I have lived for 3,000 years. I have seen species rise and fall. I have watched the galaxy change in ways you cannot imagine. But I have never forgotten those three humans who ended a war with nothing but compassion." "You think we're like them?" So Min asked. "I think you are them," Ancient One replied. "Not the same individuals, but the same species, the same impossible ability to connect with others across the barriers that separate us." Duwan looked uncomfortable. "If this is true, why haven't we known about it? Why doesn't humanity remember these three heroes?" Ancient One smiled sadly. "Because humanity has tried very hard to forget. After the three returned to your space, your species made a choice. You decided that this ability was too dangerous to use. You buried the records, changed the histories, and tried to become ordinary. But the ability never went away," he continued. "It simply went dormant, waiting for the right moment to surface again. Today, in that meeting hall, I saw it awakening in you, Taeho." Taeho felt a chill run down his spine. "What does this mean? For the negotiations?" Ancient One walked to the wall and touched another control. Images appeared showing the current state of the galaxy. Tensions between species, territorial disputes, the same patterns that had led to the War of 1,000 Suns. "It means," he said quietly, "that the galaxy needs what humanity can offer." The emergency alarm echoed through the meeting hall at dawn. Taeho woke in his quarters to find Dowan shaking his shoulder urgently. "Ambassador, there's been a murder," Dowan said. "Someone killed the Shadowkin delegate." Taeho sat up quickly. "Umbral Whisper is dead?" "Found in their quarters an hour ago," Dowan replied. "The Council is calling an emergency session. This could destroy the peace talks." So Min burst through the door, her datapad glowing with urgent messages. "The accusations are already flying. Half the species think the Torgan Imperium did it. The other half suspect different groups. Everyone is choosing sides." The three humans rushed to the meeting hall. The atmosphere had changed completely from the day before. Where there had been tension, now there was open hostility. Delegates stood in armed groups, glaring at each other across the vast space. War Chieftain Grixtal stood before the Torgan delegation, his red armor gleaming under the hall's lights. "The Torgans had no reason to kill a shadow creature," he declared. "We fight our enemies in honest battle, not through assassination in the dark. But other species weren't convinced. The hive speakers clicked angrily among themselves, their bioweapons extending and retracting in agitation. The resonance hummed with frequencies that made the air vibrate with danger. Ancient One Who Remembers called for order, but his voice was nearly lost in the chaos. "We must investigate this crime properly," he said. "We cannot let fear and suspicion destroy what we came here to build." That's when General Crag Bloodclaw of the Torgan Imperium stood up. He was even larger than Grixtal, covered in scars from 100 battles. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded armies. "Enough of this talk," Crag Bloodclaw growled. "The shadow thing is dead. Someone here killed it. We demand a trial by combat to find the truth." The hall fell, silent. Trial by combat was an ancient tradition, older than the Galactic Council itself. When accusations flew and evidence was unclear, species could demand that champions fight to determine guilt or innocence. It was brutal, but it was considered fair. The idea was that truth would give strength to the innocent. "The Torgan Imperium is accused," Crag Bloodclaw continued. "We accept the challenge. Let any species that doubts our honor send their champion to face me in the sacred arena." Several species began choosing their champions immediately. The hive speakers selected their largest warrior. The resonance picked a crystal being whose body could cut through metal. Even some of the smaller species chose fighters, preferring combat to the uncertainty of investigation. Tai-Ho watched this with growing alarm. If champions from multiple species fought each other, it wouldn't determine who killed Umbral Whisper. It would just start the kind of violence that could spread beyond this room. "Ancient One," he said, standing up. "May I speak?" The old being nodded. "The human delegation has the right to be heard." Tai-Ho walked to the center of the hall. Around him, alien warriors prepared for battle. Their weapons gleamed. Their armor hummed with defensive energy. He looked very small and very human among them. "Friends," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I understand the need for justice. Umbral Whisper deserves justice. But how will fighting each other? Help us find the real killer?" Crag Bloodclaw laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "The human speaks of things he doesn't understand. Trial by combat isn't about finding killers. It's about proving strength and honor. The strongest champion represents the most honorable species." "But what if the killer isn't from the strongest species?" Tai-Ho asked. "What if they're counting on us to fight each other while they escape justice?" Some of the delegates began to murmur. Tai-Ho's words made sense, but tradition was tradition. The trial by combat had been used to settle disputes for thousands of years. Crystal Singer 7 spoke in harmonics that translated to words. "The human suggests we abandon sacred law, but law exists because investigation can be corrupted. In combat, only truth remains." Tai-Ho nodded respectfully. "I respect your traditions, but I ask for something different. Let humanity serve as mediator in this trial." The hall erupted in confusion. No species had ever requested to mediate a trial by combat. The role of mediator was usually taken by neutral observers who watched the fight and declared the winner. "What? Does the human propose, eh?" Ancient One asked, clearly intrigued. Tai-Ho took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest went against every diplomatic protocol he had ever learned. But the memory of Ancient One's story about the 3 humans who ended a galactic war gave him courage. "I propose that instead of multiple champions fighting each other, one human enters the arena with the accused," he said. "Not to fight, but to seek the truth through a different kind of trial. Grixtal's laughter was harsh. The soft human wants to face Crag Bloodclaw in combat? This will be entertaining. The Torgan general will tear him apart in seconds. No, Taeho said firmly. Not combat. Conversation. The hall fell completely silent. Even the background hum of technology seemed to pause. Crag Bloodclaw stepped forward, his massive form casting a shadow over Taeho. You want to talk your way through a trial by combat? Human. You understand nothing about honor or strength. I understand that if you're innocent, proving it through violence won't help. Us find the real killer, Taeho replied calmly, and if you're guilty, defeating me in combat won't change that truth. So Min grabbed Taeho's arm. Ambassador, you can't do this. Even if he doesn't try to kill you, the other species will see this as a sign of human weakness. Du-Wan stepped closer. Sir, my job is to protect you. I can't let you enter an arena with an armed Torgan general. But Taeho's mind was made up. He thought about Han Ji-woo, Yoon Nari, and Choi Min-ho walking into the middle of a galactic war with no weapons and no fear. If they could end a war with words, maybe he could prevent one the same way. I volunteer to represent humanity in this trial, he announced. General Crag Bloodclaw, will you face me in the arena? The Torgan general stared down at the small human. Crag Bloodclaw had fought creatures twice his size. He had survived battles that had killed thousands. The idea of facing an unarmed human in the sacred arena was almost insulting, but something in Taeho's eyes gave him pause. There was no fear there, no doubt. Just a calm certainty that reminded him of the greatest warriors he had ever known. Very well, human, Crag Bloodclaw said slowly. I accept your strange challenge, but know this. If you enter the arena with me, you enter it under combat law. I will not be responsible for what happens to you. Ancient One Who Remembers raised his hand. The terms are set. In 1 hour, General Crag Bloodclaw of the Torgan Imperium will face Ambassador Lee Taeho of humanity in the sacred arena. Let truth be the judge of their encounter. The next hour passed quickly. So Min tried to convince Taeho to change his mind. Du-Wan offered to take his place. Other delegates watched the humans with mixtures of curiosity and pity, but Taeho spent the time in quiet meditation, preparing his mind for what was to come. He thought about what Ancient One had told them about human empathy. If he really could feel what others felt, maybe he could understand Crag Bloodclaw well enough to find the truth. The arena was a circular space with walls that rose high above the floor. Viewing areas allowed all the delegates to watch what happened below. Energy barriers would prevent outside interference once the trial began. Crag Bloodclaw entered the arena in full battle armor. His weapon was a massive sword that could cut through almost any material. Energy shields protected his vital areas. He looked like a walking fortress. Taeho entered wearing his simple diplomatic suit. He carried no weapons, no protection. He walked to the center of the arena and waited. "Begin!" Ancient One announced. But instead of charging forward, Crag Bloodclaw stopped a few feet away from Taeho. The Torgan general raised his sword but didn't strike. "Why?" Crag Bloodclaw asked. "Why do you stand here defenseless? Do you seek death with honor?" "I seek truth," Taeho replied. "General, you've fought in many battles. You've seen many warriors die. When you kill an enemy in honest combat, how does it feel?" The question caught Crag Bloodclaw off guard. "It feels like victory, like justice served. And when you heard that umbral whisper was dead, how did that feel?" Crag Bloodclaw hesitated. His sword lowered slightly. Different. The shadow creature was no warrior. Its death brought no honor to anyone. Tae-ho stepped closer, and something strange began to happen. As he focused on the Torgan general, he started to feel echoes of the alien's emotions. Frustration, anger, but also something else. Genuine confusion and hurt. You're angry that anyone would think you capable of assassination, Tae-ho said softly. You've built your entire life around honorable combat. The idea that others see you as a murderer in the shadows wounds you more than any blade ever could. Crag Bloodclaw's sword dropped to his side. How do you know this? Because I can feel it, Tae-ho said. Your pain at being falsely accused. Your anger at having your honor questioned. General, you didn't kill Umbral Whisper. The watching delegates leaned forward. This wasn't the kind of trial they had expected. But someone did, Tae-ho continued, his voice growing stronger. Someone who wanted the Torgan Imperium to be blamed. Someone who benefits from suspicion and conflict between our species. He turned to address the viewing areas above the arena. 2 days after the trial, Do-won found Tae-ho sitting alone in his quarters, staring out at the 3 suns of Nexus Prime. The ambassador looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Sir, Do-won said carefully, so Min and I need to talk to you about what happened in the arena? Tae-ho didn't turn around. You think I did something wrong? We think you did something impossible, So-min said as she entered the room. She carried a data pad filled with research notes and video recordings. Ambassador, normal humans can't make entire rooms of aliens feel the same emotions. That's not how empathy works. Do-won sat down across from Tae-ho. Sir, I've been your security chief for 3 years. I've watched you negotiate with dozens of alien species. You've always been good at understanding what others need, but this was different. This was like you were broadcasting feelings directly into their minds. Tae-ho finally turned to face them. His eyes looked haunted. What if Ancient One who remembers was right? What if there's something different about humans? Something we don't understand about ourselves? So-min activated her data pad and showed him brain scan readings. I've been analyzing the arena recordings. Watch this. The screen showed energy, readings from the trial. At the moment when Tae-ho had made everyone feel the killer's emotions, there had been a massive spike in electromagnetic activity centered on his position. These readings are impossible, So-min said. They show your brain producing energy patterns that reached every being in the arena. But human brains don't work that way. We don't have the biological structures to project thoughts or emotions. Do-won leaned forward. Unless we do, and we just never knew it. Before Tae-ho could respond, the door chimed. Ancient One who remembers entered, followed by someone the humans had never seen before. A tall, thin human with gray hair and kind eyes. Ambassador Tae-ho, Ancient One said, I would like you to meet Dr. Bae Hyun-woo. He arrived this morning. From Earth. Hyun-woo bowed politely to the 3 diplomats. I'm sorry to arrive unannounced, but when reports of your trial reached Earth, my research department felt I needed to come immediately. What kind of research? Tae-ho asked. Xenopsychology, Hyun-woo replied. Specifically, I study how human psychology interacts with alien mental patterns. What you did in that arena should have been impossible according to everything we know about interspecies communication. So-min showed him her data pad. The energy readings confirm that something extraordinary happened, but we can't explain how. Hyun-woo studied the readings with growing excitement. May I run some tests? Non-invasive scans that might help us understand what's happening to you? Tae-ho agreed, and within an hour they had set up testing equipment in a secure room. Hyunwoo attached sensors to Tae-ho's head and asked him to try to recreate what he had done in the arena. Think about the emotions you felt from General Crag Bloodclaw, Hyunwoo instructed. Try to remember not just what he said, but what he felt. Tae-ho closed his eyes and concentrated. Almost immediately, the sensors began registering unusual activity. But this time, something else happened. Do-won and So-min, who were standing nearby, suddenly felt a wave of emotion that wasn't their own. For a moment, they experienced Crag Bloodclaw's feelings as Tae-ho had. The Torgan general's wounded pride, his confusion at being accused of dishonorable behavior, his deep respect for the traditions of combat. The emotions were alien but somehow understandable. "Stop," Hyunwoo said quickly, and Tae-ho opened his eyes. "Did you all feel that?" So-min nodded, looking shaken. "It was like experiencing someone else's thoughts and feelings as if they were my own." Do-won was frowning. "How is this possible? I felt emotions that belong to an alien warrior I've never met." Hyunwoo studied the test results with growing amazement. "This is extraordinary. Tae-ho, your brain is producing what I can only describe as empathic resonance, energy patterns that allow others to directly experience the emotions you're feeling." "But how?" Tae-ho asked. "Humans don't have telepathic abilities." "Not telepathy," Hyunwoo corrected. "Something much more subtle and much more powerful. You're not reading minds or controlling thoughts. You're sharing emotional experiences across species barriers." Ancient One Who Remembers spoke from where he had been quietly observing. "This is what Ji-woo, Nari, and Minho could do. They didn't force anyone to stop fighting. They made the warriors feel the true cost of war." Hyunwoo pulled up more data on his portable computer. "I've been studying historical records since Ancient One contacted Earth about your abilities. There are reports going back centuries of humans who could do similar things, but they were always dismissed as legends or exaggerations." "What kind of reports?" So-min asked. "Mediators who could end conflicts just by talking to the opposing sides," Hyunwoo explained. "Negotiators who seemed to understand alien psychology better than the aliens themselves. Diplomats who could make hostile species suddenly see each other's point of view." He showed them historical documents from Earth's archives. "Look at this report from the first contact with the Centauri Republic. The human ambassador, Kim Sun-ho, prevented a war by making both sides feel each other's fear and hope." Or this, one from trade negotiations with the Vegan Alliance. Ambassador Park Mi-jung ended a decade-long dispute by helping each species understand the other's cultural needs. Do-won studied the reports. "If this ability exists, why don't we know about it? Why isn't it part of diplomatic training?" Hyunwoo's expression grew serious. "Because it's dangerous. Look at this classified report from 50 years ago." The screen showed a different kind of document, an incident report marked with security warnings. It described a human diplomat named Choi Jae-sung, who had tried to use empathic abilities to end a conflict between two alien species. "What happened to him?" Tae-ho asked. "He became overwhelmed by the emotions he was channeling," Hyunwoo explained. "The alien species he was trying to help were filled with generations of hatred and anger. When he tried to make them feel each other's pain, he ended up experiencing all of that hatred himself." The report showed the aftermath. Choi Jae-sung had suffered a complete mental breakdown and never recovered. Worse, His uncontrolled emotional broadcasting had driven the alien negotiators into a berserker rage that led to the very war he had been trying to prevent. That's why Earth classified this research, Hyunwoo continued. We discovered that while humans can share emotions across species, we can also accidentally amplify negative emotions. A human filled with anger or hatred could potentially drive entire alien populations to violence. So-min looked alarmed. You're saying Tae-ho could be dangerous? All humans with this ability could be dangerous, Hyunwoo confirmed. But they could also be the key to lasting peace in the galaxy. The question is whether we can learn to control and use this ability safely. Tae-ho stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see delegates from dozens of species working together on the treaty negotiations. For the first time since the trial, there was real cooperation happening. What does this mean for the negotiations? He asked. Ancient One joined him at the window. It means the galaxy must make a decision about humanity. Some species will want to restrict your people, fearing what you might do if your emotions turn dark. Others will want to use your abilities for their own purposes. And some, Hyunwoo added, will simply want to understand how this gift can be used to build a better galaxy. Doo-won was studying the classified reports. These documents mention something called the Terran Protocols, restrictions that were put in place after the Choi Jae-sung incident. What are those? Hyunwoo pulled up another file. Guidelines for humans with empathic abilities, mandatory psychological evaluation, emotional stability training, and most importantly, restrictions on carrying weapons. Weapons? So-min asked. What do weapons have to do with emotional abilities? Everything, Ancient One said quietly. An armed human filled with anger could not only commit violence themselves, but could drive others to uncontrollable rage. The combination of weapons and unchecked empathic broadcasting could start wars instead of ending them. Tae-ho understood now why humans were the only species allowed to be weaponless in royal courts. It wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a safety measure. Human diplomats were kept unarmed not to protect others from human violence, but to protect everyone from the emotional chaos that armed humans could accidentally create. So what happens now? Tae-ho asked. Do I stop being a diplomat? Do we tell the galactic community about this ability? Hyunwoo checked his readings one more time. That decision isn't mine to make, but I can tell you this. Your empathic resonance is stronger than anyone we've ever measured. You have the potential to be either the greatest peacemaker in galactic history or the most dangerous human alive. Through the window, they watched as a group of former enemies worked together on the complex details of the peace treaty. The Torgan and Shadowkin delegations were actually sitting at the same table, sharing ideas about border security. They're cooperating because of what happened in the arena, Ancient One observed. Your emotional sharing showed them that their supposed enemies were not so different from themselves. Tae-ho made his decision. Then we need to tell the Council the truth, all of it. They deserve to know what they're dealing with when they work. The final session of the Galactic Council was unlike any meeting in recorded history. Word had spread about what the humans planned to reveal, and delegates from across the galaxy had arrived to witness it. The Great Hall was filled beyond capacity, with representatives from species that rarely left their home systems. Tae-ho stood before the assembled delegates, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon him. So-min and Do-won flanked him, while Dr. Hyunwoo sat nearby with his research data. Ancient One who remembers had taken his place among the council elders, his ancient face grave with the importance of the moment. Honored delegates, Taeho, began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. I stand before you today to reveal a truth about humanity that we ourselves have only recently come to understand. The hall fell silent. Even the constant background hum of translation devices seemed muted. 3 days ago, in the sacred arena, something impossible happened. I was able to share the emotions of one being with hundreds of others. You felt what the true killer felt. You experienced their twisted joy at the thought of renewed warfare. This was not an accident or a fluke of technology. Taeho paused, looking around the hall at faces both familiar and alien. This was an expression of an ability that some humans possess, the capacity to share emotional experiences across species barriers. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some delegates leaned forward with interest while others drew back in alarm. War Chieftain Grixtal stood up, his red armor glinting. Are you claiming that humans can control our minds? No, Taeho said firmly. We cannot control thoughts or force decisions. We can only help others feel what we feel, or share the emotions we sense from those around us. It is not mind control. It is emotional sharing. Dr. Hyun Woo activated a holographic display showing brain scans and energy readings. Our research indicates that this ability evolved as a survival mechanism, he explained. Early humans needed to understand the emotions of other species to negotiate successfully. Over time, some humans developed the capacity to not just read emotions, but to share them. Crystal Singer Seven's harmonic voice filled the hall. This explains much about human diplomatic success. You do not just understand our needs. You feel them as your own. Exactly, Taeho said. When I negotiate with the resonance about mining rights, I can feel your species' deep connection to crystal formations. When I speak with the hive speakers about territorial boundaries, I experience your collective consciousness's need for expansion space. General Crag Bloodclaw, still wearing his battle armor but with his helmet removed, spoke next. In the arena, I felt your certainty of my innocence. But I also felt the killer's guilt as if it were my own emotion. How is this possible? We don't fully understand the mechanism, Hyunwoo admitted. But we believe that human empathic abilities work by creating emotional resonance fields that can bridge the gap between different types of consciousness. A delegate from the Insectoid Swarm Collective clicked anxiously. If humans can share emotions, what prevents them from sharing hatred or rage? Could they not drive us to violence as easily as they drive us to peace? The question that everyone had been thinking was finally spoken aloud. The hall fell completely silent as delegates waited for the answer. Taeho nodded gravely. You are right to be concerned. Our research has uncovered incidents where humans accidentally amplified negative emotions, leading to violence instead of peace. This is why Earth has developed strict protocols for humans with empathic abilities. He gestured to his simple diplomatic clothing. This is why human diplomats carry no weapons. An armed human overcome by anger or fear could accidentally broadcast those emotions and turn a peaceful negotiation into a battlefield. Ancient One who remembers stood slowly, his ancient form commanding attention. I have lived for 3,000 years. I witnessed the War of 1,000 Suns, and I saw how 3 humans ended it. What young Taeho tells you is true. Humans can share emotions across species, but they can also choose what emotions to share. The old being's voice carried the weight of millennia. Jiwoo, Nari, and Minho could have filled our war fleets with their own anger at the destruction they witnessed. Instead, they chose to share compassion, understanding, and hope for peace. The choice of what to feel and what to share, that is what makes humans either dangerous or invaluable. A representative from the Neutral Commerce Guild stood up. What guarantee do we have that humans will always choose to share positive emotions? What prevents them from using this ability for conquest or manipulation? So Min stepped forward. Because we know what it costs us, she said simply. When Taiho shares emotions with others, he experiences them too. He cannot make you feel anger without feeling it himself. He cannot broadcast hatred without being consumed by it. Our empathic abilities force us to experience the emotional consequences of our choices. Dr. Hyunwoo added, this is perhaps the most important aspect of human empathic resonance. It creates a feedback loop. Humans with this ability cannot harm others emotionally without harming themselves. They cannot drive others to violence without experiencing that violence personally. Umbral Whisper 2, the new representative of the Shadowkin delegation, spoke from the darkness of their section. The human speaks of choice, but what of accidents? What if a human diplomat experiences trauma or loss? Could their grief not spread to others involuntarily? Taeho had been wondering about this himself. That's a risk we must acknowledge. Human emotions are not always under conscious control, but our research suggests that empathic broadcasting requires a deliberate focusing of attention. Passive emotions are felt by the human but not automatically shared. Though, he added honestly, we are still learning about these abilities. That's why we propose the establishment of formal protocols and training programs. The debate continued for hours. Representatives from dozens of species voiced their concerns, hopes, and fears about humanity's empathic abilities. Some saw humans as potential saviors who could end conflicts through understanding. Others viewed them as dangerous manipulators who could control galactic politics through emotional influence. Finally, Ancient One called for order. We have heard much testimony. Now we must decide how the galaxy will respond to this revelation about humanity. The vote was not simple. Rather than a single yes or no decision, the Council had to consider multiple proposals. Some species wanted to ban humans from diplomatic roles entirely. Others proposed that humans should be required to use their empathic abilities in all negotiations. Still others suggested that human empaths should be licensed and monitored like weapons of mass destruction. As the debate reached its climax, Taeho asked for permission to speak one final time. Honored delegates, he said, I understand your concerns about human empathic abilities. We share those concerns. But I ask you to consider what you have witnessed over the past week. He gestured toward the viewing areas where representatives from formerly hostile species now sat together. The Torgan Imperium and the Shadowkin Collective are working together on security protocols. The Hive Speakers and the Resonants have found common ground on territorial boundaries. Former enemies are becoming allies. This happened not because I forced anyone to change their minds, but because I helped you feel what your supposed enemies were feeling. You discovered that the Torgan's desire for honor was not so different from your own need for respect. You learned that the Shadowkin's preference for privacy came from the same place as your own desire for security. Taeho's voice grew stronger as he continued. Our empathic abilities do not create false emotions. They reveal true feelings that already exist. They help us understand that beneath our different forms and cultures, we all share common needs and fears. The hall was completely silent as delegates absorbed his words. I propose a covenant, Tejo said. Humanity will accept restrictions on our diplomatic personnel. We will undergo training and evaluation. We will carry no weapons in diplomatic settings. In exchange, we ask to be recognized as what we have always been, mediators who can help bridge the gaps between species. Ancient One Who Remembers called for the final vote. One by one, each species declared their position. The result was closer than anyone had expected, but the decision was unanimous when the final count was taken. The Terran Covenant was established with the following terms. Human diplomats would be prohibited from carrying weapons in any diplomatic setting. They would undergo mandatory psychological evaluation and emotional stability training. Any human showing signs of empathic abilities would be required to register with both Earth authorities and the Galactic Council. In exchange, humans would be granted special status as galactic mediators. Any species could request human intervention in conflicts. Human empathic abilities would be recognized as a legitimate diplomatic tool, subject to ethical guidelines and oversight. Most importantly, the Covenant established the principle that emotional manipulation, using empathic abilities to force decisions rather than simply sharing understanding, would be considered a crime against sentient beings. As the session ended, delegates from across the galaxy approached Tejo with new respect. Some wanted to discuss minor disputes that human mediators might help resolve. Others simply wanted to understand.